Welcome to Infinite Findings, where we explore the mysteries that reshape our understanding of human history. Every now and then, a discovery comes along that forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. Sometimes it's a lost city. Sometimes it's an ancient artifact that shouldn't exist. But the discovery we're about to tell you about happened in the most unassuming way possible. It didn't involve grand monuments or spectacular finds. Instead, it started with something so ordinary, so humble, that for decades it went completely unnoticed. In the hills of south-central Oregon, nestled above what is now a dry lake bed, 5 caves cut into a cliff face have become the center of one of archaeology's most significant revisions. What researchers pulled from the earth at this site didn't just challenge the established history of America. It threatened to demolish it entirely. But before we get to that moment, we need to understand the story that came before. Because to truly grasp why this discovery matters so much, you need to know exactly what it's challenging. The narrative you learned in school about America's first inhabitants was remarkably straightforward. Somewhere around 13,000 years ago, perhaps a bit earlier or later, a group of hunters made their way across a stretch of land that connected modern-day Siberia to modern-day Alaska. This land bridge, known to science as Beringia, existed because the climate was radically different back then. Ice ages had locked away massive amounts of water, and sea levels had plummeted. That vast bridge of earth and grassland stretched across what is now the Bering Sea, and it was the gateway to an entire continent. These intrepid travelers followed the megafauna they hunted. Woolly mammoths, enormous bison species that dwarf anything alive today. Mastodons with their towering frames. Moving south, they eventually found their way through an ice-free corridor between 2 colossal glaciers. From there, they dispersed across North and South America, becoming the ancestors of every indigenous civilization that would eventually flourish. Or at least, that's what we all believed to be true. The theory had a name, and it had staying power. They called it the Clovis First Model, and it took its name from a small town in New Mexico. Back in 1929, archaeologists working near Clovis discovered something intriguing. Alongside the fossilized remains of long-extinct Ice Age, creatures were distinctive stone spear points. These weren't crude rocks. They were deliberately crafted, expertly fluted at the base, so they could be attached securely to wooden shafts. Beautiful objects, really. The work of skilled artisans. These Clovis points became the archaeological signature. The fingerprint left behind by America's first people. The theory made sense. The mathematics checked out. The geological timeline seemed to align. Scientists built entire careers on this framework. Universities structured entire departments around it. Papers were published. Dissertations were defended. It became not just a theory, but established fact. Gospel, as the saying goes. But here's the thing about scientific consensus. When new evidence arrives, when reality fails to cooperate with what you've already decided to believe, the moment becomes uncomfortable. And in Oregon, the evidence arrived with the kind of urgency that made everyone deeply, profoundly uneasy. The site itself has an almost unremarkable name: Paisley Caves. There's nothing ominous about it, nothing that suggests the archaeological earthquake that was about to unfold. The name conjures images of casual tourists, maybe a roadside attraction. But these 5 U-shaped cavities carved into Oregon's cliffs above Summer Lake would become one of the most consequential archaeological locations ever discovered in North America. The caves had been excavated before. Way back in the 1930s, an archaeologist named Luther Cressman worked the site and found clear evidence that humans had occupied these caves in antiquity. He discovered tools and animal bones that spoke to habitation stretching back across the centuries. But the dating techniques available to him were primitive by modern standards. The scientific establishment didn't quite know what to make of his findings, and eventually, the caves faded from the forefront of archaeological attention. They sat quiet for decades, their secrets still buried beneath accumulated sediment and time. Then, in 2002, something changed. Dennis Jenkins, an archaeologist from the University of Oregon, came to Paisley Caves with something Cressman hadn't possessed: modern technology, refined methodology. and a very specific question he wanted answered. Just how ancient was this site, really? What Jenkins and his team discovered over the subsequent years of meticulous excavation sent shockwaves through the scientific community. It wasn't what they found that was remarkable. It was how old it was. Buried in the precisely layered sediment beneath thousands of years of accumulated debris, they recovered samples of something that most people would never think twice about: coprolites. If that word isn't familiar, coprolites are fossilized human feces. And yes, I understand that sounds like an odd thing to get excited about. And yet, here we are. Because scientists got excited. Very excited. The team applied radiocarbon dating to these ancient samples with extreme care. They replicated their methodology. They consulted with independent laboratories. The results came back consistent, and when they did, the entire archaeological establishment had to pause and process what they were looking at. The coprolites dated to 14,300 years ago. 14,300. Take a moment to sit with that number. According to the Clovis first model, no human being should have been in Oregon at that time. No one should have been anywhere in the interior of North America south of the glaciers. The ice-free corridor that supposedly permitted migration from Alaska wasn't fully open until roughly 13,500 years ago. Someone had managed to reach Oregon before the corridor even opened. This wasn't the kind of finding that skeptics could easily dismiss. But skeptics tried. They asked the obvious question: how can you be certain these coprolites are actually human? Wolves leave feces. Bears do too. Other animals wander into caves. How can you be absolutely sure about what this was? Fair question. Legitimate question. And this is where the evidence transformed from interesting into something far more powerful. The researchers didn't just date the coprolites. They extracted DNA from inside them. Ancient DNA that had somehow survived 14,000 years, preserved by the cold, dry conditions of those Oregon caves. And that DNA told a story that couldn't be argued with or reinterpreted or dismissed as contamination. It was unambiguously human DNA. More than that, the specific genetic lineages recovered were mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, A2 and B2. These are genetic signatures found in indigenous populations throughout the Americas today. This wasn't random DNA from some unknown source. This was a direct genetic link between the people who inhabited those caves 14,000 years ago and Native Americans alive in the present day. But the evidence didn't stop there. No, that was just the beginning. Around those coprolites, archaeologists uncovered strands of shredded sagebrush bark, the kind humans have used for countless generations to make cordage, baskets, and other woven goods. Nearby, they found bones. The bones of horses and camels. These weren't horses or camels as we know them today. These were prehistoric species now extinct, and these bones showed unmistakable signs of human processing. Cut marks from stone tools, evidence that humans had butchered these animals. Western camel bones bearing the precise marks consistent with ancient stone tool use. Plant remains that showed clear evidence of human consumption. All of it layered into the earth in sediment levels that hadn't been disturbed since before Egyptian pyramids were even conceived. Critically, the stratigraphic record was pristine. The layers of sediment were well-defined and unambiguous. The human materials didn't appear scattered or confused across different time periods. They appeared where they belonged, in layers that consistently dated to the same period, 14,300 years ago. Not on one radiocarbon test, but repeatedly. Multiple independent laboratories running the analysis. Multiple research teams examining the methodology. The numbers kept coming back identical. This wasn't contamination. This wasn't error or sloppy methodology or misidentification. This was real. The Clovis first model suddenly faced a problem it couldn't adequately solve. But what came next was even more unsettling. Here's where the puzzle becomes genuinely strange. The DNA recovered from those coprolites matched Native American haplogroups. That much made sense. That's exactly what you'd expect to find. But when geneticists examined the genetic profile in finer detail, something unexpected emerged. Something that genuinely puzzled serious researchers. The genetic signature didn't fit cleanly onto established population models. It was indisputably human, unquestionably Native American in its broader characteristics. But when you looked at the specific details, something was off. The fine details didn't map perfectly onto any single identifiable indigenous American group that exists today or existed in the historical record. The people who left those remains in Oregon 14,000 years ago didn't appear to be direct ancestors of any one particular indigenous population. It's as though they were Native American, but also somehow distinct. And that raises a question that science is still working to answer. Who were they, really? Where did they come from? And where did they go? This genetic puzzle hints at a history far more complex than a simple migration event. Perhaps there was more than one wave of settlement. Perhaps coastal routes brought maritime peoples down the Pacific shores long before inland routes were viable. Perhaps genetic lineages have changed, merged, or disappeared over 14,000 years in ways we don't yet fully understand. But as mysterious as that question is, it pales compared to the question Paisley Caves raises about the route itself. Because if people were in Oregon 14,000 years ago, they couldn't have come overland through the ice-free corridor. The timing doesn't work. The geography doesn't work. The numbers simply don't work. Instead, researchers have proposed something radical. These early inhabitants likely traveled by water. Think about what that means. It means people possessed sophisticated watercraft capable of ocean travel. It means they had navigational knowledge sufficient to follow coastlines across thousands of miles, across generations, through unknown waters. It means they had social structures capable of organizing and maintaining multi-generational migrations. It means they had the flexibility to transition from marine resources to inland ones as they moved into the continent's interior. It means they had knowledge systems deep enough to survive in completely unfamiliar environments. These weren't desperate wanderers stumbling across a land bridge. These were accomplished seafarers, skilled hunters, expert plant processors, sophisticated people with knowledge systems that rival anything humans were doing elsewhere on the planet at that time. But Paisley Caves isn't alone in challenging the old model. Other sites have started producing evidence too. In southern Chile, at a place called Monte Verde, archaeologists found evidence of human habitation stretching back to at least 14,600 years ago, possibly older. Now stop and think about the geography for a moment. Southern Chile is one of the most remote locations on the entire continent. It's at the very southern tip of South America. If the Clovis first model were true, if humans only arrived in Alaska around 14,000 years ago and then slowly moved south, the distance you'd need to cover in the time available makes the math impossible. You can't traverse that distance on foot. Not through unknown territory. Not without a significant head start. Then there's the Buttermilks Creek site in Texas. This isn't a handful of tools. Researchers recovered thousands of stone implements from sediment layers that date to 15,500 years ago. Thousands. All stratified carefully in undisturbed earth layers, predating the Clovis period by over 1,000 years, predating the supposed opening of the ice-free corridor. Predating, according to the old model, any human presence anywhere south of the glaciers. Florida adds another complication. Submerged sinkholes have yielded human remains and artifacts dated to 14,300 years ago, exactly the same time frame as Paisley Caves, on the complete opposite side of the continent. Simultaneously, according to a model that says nobody should have been in either location yet, Brazil pushes the mystery deeper still. Rock shelters there show potential evidence of human presence extending back possibly 22,000 years or more. Now, to be intellectually honest, those dates remain contested. They haven't yet produced the kind of independent verification and multiple confirmations that would definitively settle the question. We should treat them as promising possibilities rather than proven facts. But the pattern is becoming unmistakable. Even if you disregard every contested site, even if you apply the most rigorous standards of evidence, and only count findings that have survived intense scrutiny from skeptical researchers, what remains is a pattern the Clovis first model simply cannot explain. People across the Americas appeared earlier than Clovis predicted. They spread across distances so vast that a single migration event through a single corridor at a single moment in time cannot account for their distribution. What Paisley Caves contributed to this growing body of evidence was something many other pre-Clovis sites lacked: unambiguous human biological material. Ancient DNA extracted, sequenced, and independently verified, connected to living populations, preserved in precisely dated sediment layers. Not tools, which skeptics can always argue were misidentified or moved by geological processes. Not cut marks on bones, which require interpretive judgment and leave room for reasonable doubt. Actual human DNA. The clearest, most direct evidence that a human being was somewhere at a specific time in history. Paisley Caves didn't just add another data point to the pre-Clovis argument. It gave that entire argument a backbone. Now think about what all of this actually means, not just for archaeology, but for the broader human story, for how we understand who we are and what we've accomplished. If human beings reached Oregon 14,300 years ago using maritime routes and sophisticated watercraft, then human capacity for long-distance movement and environmental adaptation was far more advanced and far earlier than textbooks ever acknowledged. The people who made those coastal journeys possessed knowledge and skills we're only now beginning to appreciate. Consider what would have been necessary. Boats capable of handling cold, rough Pacific Ocean conditions. Navigation techniques sufficient to follow a coastline across thousands of miles across multiple generations. Social organization capable of planning and executing multi-generational journeys. The flexibility to adapt their subsistence strategies as they moved through different environments. The knowledge to identify and process food sources they'd never encountered before. These are not primitive achievements. These are not the capabilities of desperate people stumbling randomly across a land bridge in darkness. These are the capabilities of sophisticated, knowledgeable, culturally complex human societies operating at a level of competence we should respect. And if those societies existed 14,000 years ago, crossing the Pacific coast and settling Oregon, what else were they capable of? What other movements lie hidden in the past? What other achievements have we overlooked? What other chapters of human history are buried underwater or beneath sediment layers or hidden under assumptions we've never thought to question? Paisley Caves changes more than just the date of human arrival in North America. It changes the story of what kind of beings were arriving. Not refugees fleeing some distant homeland. Accomplished seafarers, competent hunters, skilled processors of plants. People with knowledge systems complex enough to navigate and survive in completely unfamiliar landscapes. Real people with real skills and daily lives who were here far longer than we ever gave them credit for. That is a different story than the one in the textbooks. A bigger story. A more impressive one. A more human one. The caves above Summer Lake are still there today. Researchers continue to study them. Dennis Jenkins and his team continue to pull evidence from the Earth and work to understand it, date it, and integrate it into an emerging picture of early American prehistory that's substantially more complex and substantially more interesting than anything the Clovis first model could ever accommodate. When Jenkins started this work, he wasn't trying to revolutionize everything we know about human origins. He simply wanted to answer a specific question about one site using the best available methodology. What he found exceeded any reasonable expectation. The Clovis first model hasn't completely disappeared. Parts of it survive, modified, and refined. The Beringian crossing almost certainly happened. Genetics and archaeology both support it. But it almost certainly wasn't the only crossing. It probably wasn't the earliest. And the people who crossed weren't probably the sole ancestors of the Native American populations that greeted European explorers thousands of years later. What remains is messier, more complicated, and more honest than the clean narrative textbooks preferred. What we're left with is the likelihood that the Americas were settled through a process that was complicated, multi-directional, and far earlier than 20th century archaeologists were willing to accept. Sitting at the center of that revised understanding, quiet and unassuming, is a series of shallow caves above a dry lake bed in Oregon. 14,300 years ago, human beings lit fires in those caves. They processed sagebrush bark. They butchered animals. They ate food. They went about their daily lives. And in doing so, they left behind biological evidence that would survive long enough for 21st century scientists to discover it, analyze it, and understand what it meant. They had no idea they were making history. They were simply living the way all of us are living right now, leaving traces, shedding DNA, creating a record we cannot imagine anyone will ever find. That's what makes this discovery so profoundly extraordinary. It's not about ancient mysteries or lost civilizations or unexplainable technologies. It's about people, real people, people with knowledge and skills and daily lives, people who were here longer than we ever gave them credit for. The story of human origins in America is far from finished. Science is still writing it. Paisley Caves just proved that the first draft was wrong. And somewhere out there, beneath the sediment, underwater, hidden under assumptions we haven't yet questioned, the next discovery awaits. The next piece of evidence that will push our understanding further back, deeper into time, and closer to the truth about who we really are and where we really came from. If you've enjoyed uncovering this incredible story about how Paisley Caves reshaped our understanding of human history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Infinite Findings for more discoveries that challenge everything we thought we knew. Drop a comment below and let us know which mystery you'd like us to investigate next. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in our next discovery.